All right, so we're gonna do a little knitting today. Get myself situated. So I'm working on the Severn cardigan. I put out a poll on Monday. It was supposed to go out on Sunday. That's not what happened, but it went out on Monday. And unfortunately, nobody voted. So I made the executive decision to start on what was most pressing for me to work on, which is this cardigan, because the due date for the test knit is next week. And as you can see, we're like partially done. So I have to get to 6 repeats of these cables and we're at 4. And it's not 6 full repeats, it's the better part of 6. So I've got my sleeves set aside at this point, and those will be worked last. And this is worked from the top down, so I'll have to put the edging on, which will fix this curling issue, because it is pretty much mostly reverse stockinette. But anyway, right now I'm finishing up the waist decreases. I just added a new skein of yarn. I finished almost all of the decreases. I've got like 6 rows left. And then after that, I will be working even for a bit, and then start the very final end of the body itself, which will be basically some shaping for the bottom of the cardigan, because it has a few features that are distinct to this design. So onwards we go. Make sure that this yarn is all situated nicely. It looks a mess right now. I want to make sure that it's where I want it to be so it doesn't pull weird. There we go. Ha! If my lazy Susan wasn't busy, I would be using that. So a few things that I want you to keep in mind if you decide to knit something like this, like a sweater or a cardigan or any type of top. Stitch markers are your friend. I have used a bunch of extra ones that were not called for in the pattern in this to help me mark some very specific places. And then I have written all over the pattern. I don't really like to do that so much as there are a lot of pattern repeats just over and over again, and it was easier to put little notch marks or dots by the parts of the pattern that I had finished than it was to constantly count, because there are so many repeats. This sweater also has a lot of shaping, so I made some little notes about the order the shaping went in, because different parts of the entire sweater are shaped on sometimes concurrent rows, sometimes on different rows. And that's kind of important to, keep track. One of my favorite things about this pattern actually is the designer did a shaping tracker. So really I got to make notes on a piece of paper with little abbreviations and all the rows all put out in order, which was great. And they did it by size too, so that was really handy instead of you having to guess or fill it in yourself. And that means if I ever design a sweater, I'm absolutely probably going to do something like that, because I found that to be super, super helpful. I'm really glad to be almost done with this sweater too, because I want to wear it and I have literally a cart full of other things to work on that have been waiting for me to get to this. And so it's super important for me to get on this and get it done. And this is my first true sweater. I've done really small sample sweaters in the form of ornaments, and I've done a shrug or two where I was really just kind of testing out the idea of the pattern to see how it was constructed and how it worked up, and practicing some grafting on my own. And oh my goodness, that did not work up. But I learned a lot in the process. And when you have to graft things yourself, you start to understand why it's not as simple as just adding more stitches or adding more fabric or making things bigger. Different parts of the body grow at different rates based on age. And, some people tend to have growth spurts at a certain period of time. And then after a certain age, you stop growing up so much and then you start growing out, but you don't grow out at all the same rates. And those are all super important considerations. Pardon the noise. For when you're grafting things. And then just the variance in human bodies, right? Some people have long torsos. Some people have short legs. And so when you just graft up proportionally, that means that a lot of people will have clothes that don't quite fit. And, from just speaking to a number of people, mostly female presenting, but not exclusively, if you have, I guess, odd measurements or measurements that are outside of what designers and retailers tend to put out, then that puts you at a loss for clothing. And some people have developed a superb distaste to shopping because of it. And I can understand that. But this is part of why I want to do my own designs and why I started sewing, and I'm learning to tailor and read patterns and understand precisely where things are for me, which will help me to be able to do that for other people as well. So these two markers are dividing up the space, which is where one of the cables are. And then I've got the same two over here. And that right there was the directions of the designer. The space in between is just here where there's no cable, and it's got its own directions when there's shaping to be done. So this is really ingenious, and I don't know that I would have thought to do it myself, but this is absolutely, the way to go, because it helps you really clearly see where the cable is. And I think the hardest part of this is the counting. You gotta make sure your counting's done right. If you don't, you'll find out the hard way by trying to get your stitch count right and realizing, oh, the design is off, or there's a hole here, or there's an extra stitch, or there's not enough stitches. So what I'm doing right here is cabling without a needle. And I learned how to do that a couple of years ago, and I much prefer it. I feel it's a lot quicker, and I don't have to worry about dropping the cable needle or the stitches stretching out or getting too small. And I really like it. It takes a little more finesse, but I think it's overall quicker, personally. And then as you do something more and more, you know, you become better at it. So one of the interesting things about this particular pattern is, for me, each row, because this is worked flat technically, you know, you turn it back and forth versus working in a circle, is that each row takes me about 20 minutes. So probably what's going to end up happening is I'm going to finish this row and then I'm going to end the video. Partially because I'm sitting at like a really awkward angle to get around my tripod, but also because I have other things to do, like the dreaded laundry. I apologize, I'm trying to keep this close to where you can see it, but it doesn't get too blurry, but I'm also trying to see myself. One of the things I find myself doing a lot is when I have to do something several stitches in a row, I'll find myself counting in my head to keep track. And when I'm alone and not on video, I will call out the directions to myself sometimes. So that means now both of those cables have been worked for this row. And what's left is the rest of the back. And then after this gray marker right here, we've got, this is the front. Oh, tried to drop a stitch. Some people get really upset when they drop a stitch, and I find just you freeze, you stop moving, orient yourself with where the stitch is, and then keep going. And here we go. So the whole row was done. Took me about 18 minutes. I, stopped and chatted and showed you some things and everything like that. So I'm making little marks on my pattern so I can keep where I am. And the pattern repeats and everywhere I've got to be. And that's pretty much it. So I hope you enjoyed this live knitting. And you have an idea of, hey, how long it takes to make a sweater. So fun fact, I am at 54 hours and counting on the sweater. And of this section alone, just the body and the, the very top of the yoke. Yeah, up to the top of the yoke was 112 rows so far. I've got another 5, 11, and then 20 or 30 some left after that. And so this will be, close to 200 rows. And that's a lot of stitches. So I will go back to working on this, doing some laundry, doing some other stuff. And if you have any questions or comments, drop them in the comments below. If you're watching this on Patreon, I strongly suggest that you comment and ask any questions. For those of you who catch this live later, any kind of questions that are put on the video on YouTube, I'm going to try and get to, but I get an email notification about them. And so what'll end up happening is I won't get them immediately or as easily as I will some of the posts on the comments on